one of the mantras is you want an A team with a B idea rather than a B team with an A idea, because you want someone that's built something, someone that's got background, or someone that you feel like can do it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I have Dr. John Dayton, who is an emergency medicine physician. He is also a venture capitalist with Med Mountain Ventures. And today, we're going to be talking about all things in investing in healthcare startups as well as in healthcare innovation. Thanks, Dr. Dayton, for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So just to start off, tell me about your background and how you got into the world of investing as a physician.
Sounds great. Yeah, a little bit circuitous pathway, but I'm an emergency physician. I became involved in innovation in the mid-tens with groups like Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, and started doing some angel investing work then. And I realized it was something I enjoyed quite a bit. During the pandemic, I got a little bit burnt out, and so I was looking at revamping my career and where I was spending my time on my future orientation. I love being an ER doctor, but I wanted to do something more formally on the business side and on the innovation side. So I actually went back to school, very, very non-traditional, but I found a fellowship in innovation. Stanford's the first place to offer it, and I applied and they actually accepted me. And so I spent a couple of years doing an innovation fellowship, a biodesign fellowship, and my master's, and started working with Med Mountain Ventures over the last couple months.
So how long was the fellowship?
So initially it was a year. That's what it was supposed to be. And then they kind of came back and said, well, we have kind of a new kind of academic goal that all our fellows leave with a master's as well. And so we'll give you some money to put towards that. So ended up spending 2 years in the fellowship.
And were you able to work as well during that time, or how did you manage all that?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting situation. I split my time between doing clinical shifts. I had 8 or 10 of those a month, but the bulk of my time I spent running an incubator. Dr. Rivera and I started this group called Stanford Emergency Medicine Partnership Program, or STEP, where if a company had a medical device or a digital health therapeutic or an AI algorithmic tool, we would give them feedback. We'd do some validation. We'd research and look at results. But it was a great way to kind of modernize healthcare, but also help some of these companies kind of get speed to market. And it's an interesting space. Back in 2021, there was a lot of investment in digital health. People were really excited and made a lot of investments based on potential. And ultimately, unfortunately, the realization came that if you're going to bill for these, they need FDA approval, they need CMS, validation to reimburse, and a lot of these companies didn't quite have that on the roadmap. But you can't be profitable. You're not making any money unless you're able to bill for the services that you're providing in that space. And so, by doing research and by doing validation, our goal is to help these companies with that process, and also kind of give them feedback that would be useful, as they pivot and as they figure out what works best and kind of move to market.
So this is a really great segue to what I really want to talk about with you today, since you are an expert in this area, investing in healthcare, because obviously it is a way different playing field than any other investment territory, which, I'm sure you could probably say that about multiple different fields, but all the things that you just mentioned, making sure there's a billable code from CMS, making sure that whatever is going to be innovated is FDA approved or is in a category that doesn't need FDA approval. So those things obviously can get very expensive because you can't even start making money until you have a lot of those things, and those processes can be very costly. So what would you say is your approach as now a venture capitalist in this space when you see a company that is working on things like this? Like, what is your expectation of them to be something that you would consider to be investable?
Yeah, great question. What I look at is a company that's on that path where they have some early data, they have some feedback, but they have, on every slide deck, you see like kind of a timeline, and they hit their bullets of things that are important. If a company doesn't have, their path to FDA approval or their path to CMS reimbursement, it's a company that's going to have a hard time making revenue unless they've got a really strong, DIY component, and they validated that. And so that's a major thing that I look at. And you can look at that two ways. First way, say like, oh, they don't have everything in, all their ducks in a row. They're gonna have a hard time. But also that's a big opportunity as well. Because a lot of these early companies, they don't have the budget to hire a full-time chief medical officer or someone that's going to help them, validate their test or get, um, do research, the kind of research that needs to be done. And so a lot of times, if they have something interesting, and you can help them get, into like something like Y Combinator or some type of incubator and help speed that along or help them, adapt and have that be part of their, their runway, then that's an interesting company to invest in. But you want them to be savvy enough to realize, wait, these are major investments and time frames, and maybe they need to identify another path to profitability, before that's released. I've seen some companies lately that they offer a DIY option specifically to raise money to do a research project with a group like Mayo or Stanford. So I think that's a pretty savvy tool. But you can kind of get an idea just by looking at their timeline. Is this group savvy enough to know what it's going to take to get there? And do they have the resources, or do they have a plan to get the resources to get there?
How do you feel when you see a company, especially as a physician yourself, like how do you feel when you see a team of founders that has no physician or no clinical director sort of at the helm?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm kind of skeptical. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? I can't, on one hand, say like they don't have the budget for it, but there's a lot of physicians that take like fractional roles as chief medical officers, or they build a strong advisory board with physicians. And so I think that's a major component. A lot of what we saw in 2021 is people built these companies thinking, that they have a great idea and they're going to get there. And you save a lot of time going in front of a group of physicians. They may be the end users, they may not be the purchasers, which is tricky in and of itself. But saying like, would you use this, or how would you use this, or if we did it differently, or and just those kind of initial conversations that should happen way before a company starts, building out an MVP or making a second iteration.
So I know you invested in the pen blade. Can you talk a little bit more about that, as well as just how you got connected, what inspired you to invest, and what were some of the key features that really stood out to you when you were making that investment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I did investing with Salt Lake City Angels, there were a couple of physicians as part of that group, and one of them invented this device. He's an intensivist, and he made the scalpel so to kind of click in and out just like a pen. Simple idea, simple design, but ultimately very helpful if you look at the number of needle sticks and scalpel sticks and things that occur and what it costs the hospital and the stress for physicians. And so it was interesting because very savvy individual, but this was kind of him cutting his teeth in that space as well. So it was interesting as he evaluated building research around it, because that's our currency in medicine, evidence-based medicine. So we can get, a case report or a study that goes a long way. As he went to conferences like American College of Emergency Physicians, found other physicians who, purchased that through their hospital, but also as he navigated things like getting that on like group purchase orders and figuring out the best way to get it into hospitals, whether it was best to reach out to surgeons who were the ultimate users, or through the emergency department where everybody comes and things kind of, ideas get passed around and everyone ends up in the ER, consulting patients. And so it's interesting to see him build that strategy. And he's actually the founder of Med Mountain Ventures now. And now that he took that to market, scaled it, and then he has very interesting background, professionally, otherwise. And so it was fun to see him on that journey. It was kind of how I learned what makes a successful company and how people pivot and address challenges. And so that was a great kind of background for me.
So dialing back just a little bit, what actually got you into the VC world? I know that you had done the fellowship, you had made this angel investment with now the founder, so that was the connection, I'm assuming. But how did you actually jump into this role?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because it's VC is like a tough nut to crack, right? People are either go to like high-end business schools where they've built and scaled and sold a company that gives them street cred, or they have some interesting background. I was trying to get a mix of that with a combination of academic training, but also some work in venture capital. I have a couple buddies who started a digital health fund a few years ago called Springtide, which has done very well. Initially, when you have these funds, there's minimum investments. They want people with interesting backgrounds, that sort of thing. Your principal investors or your limited partners. And they had a pretty high ceiling for investment, but I thought they'd be really interesting to work with. And so kind of just strategized. And I said, I'd love to see how I can add value, so I can be helpful to you guys. Would you be interested in having a physician advisor, since this is health tech related? I can help you with sourcing as well, since I see a lot of startups, and I can also do some advisory work. And so I started working with them that way. And so that was my role for the first fund. I was an advisor and I was a limited partner. What we realized is I was referring a lot of companies to them. So when they built their second fund, I had a chance to work in that fund as a venture partner, meaning I was more involved with sourcing, more involved with validation of these companies. And so that was kind of my background in the VC space. And then when I was doing my fellowship, I actually took some time and spent time with Startup Health as well. They are a really interesting rotating fund. It's an investment every quarter. They have a certain amount for their institutional investors, and then for individual investors, particularly physicians, it's a little bit less, and that's very strategic. Their thought process is, physicians know other physicians who are building things. They also have the ability to validate and vet those companies. And so during a fellowship with them, I helped work on how they would reach out to other physicians in that space. We talked about using addressing specialty societies, state chapters, that sort of thing. And I did some work with them as they got ready for the Vive conference in Miami. This was a couple of years ago. And so that was kind of the culmination of that. But anyway, that's my background in VC. So after doing some work as an LP, as a venture partner, as something kind of creative with Startup Health, gave me a chance to kind of come in and join an investing team with Mid-Mountain Ventures.
Can you tell me what the difference is between an LP or a limited partner and a venture partner?
Yeah, the limited partner, mostly they're investors. So, there's like a set criteria, maybe to join this fund, certain amount of money. Some are very hands off and they say, hey, listen, I really like the folks who are investing. I'm going to put my money in and I'm, going to let them run it. Springtide is pretty strategic, where they try to get limited partners with different backgrounds in healthcare. And so that was what they did. Venture partners are more active with the deal flow. And by deal flow, I mean finding companies, kind of sourcing them, kind of validating them, giving feedback to the investment committee. And so it's a more active role.
And so does that also mean that you are taking a bigger cut of any kind of investment that becomes profitable?
Yeah. So as a venture partner, you have your initial investment as well, like a limited partner, but there is a chance to get extra carry. If I refer companies, they end up investing in them, then by carry, I mean, if the company does well and they scale, then I have potential to have additional earnings with that.
Now, some members of a venture capital firm are also paid on a yearly basis just to maintain the firm and to manage. Is that typical for venture partners or only for like the main people of the fund?
Yeah, that's more for the principals, the main investors. The partners and the principals are the one that get that carry. That's a payment. So they'll have, most of them, let's say, they'll take like 2% of what's raised, and that'll be part of that is money that they use to, host events, to connect with people, and then part of that is their salary. And then in addition to that, they have a higher percentage of the carry, meaning the company makes a lot of money. They're some of the folks that are remunerated first.
So as a limited partner, whatever you invest is basically what you are going to potentially make money on, and you're not going to have kind of the advantage as a venture partner would, or as a principal would, who would also get some of the carry as well. What is the downside of just, trying to get as many limited partners into a fund as possible, like especially if they're willing to just step back and sort of not, participate?
Yeah, I mean, just like, when you start a business and you set up your cap table, the number of people that have shares and ownership, as funds get bigger, ideally the amount that they raise for that next fund gets bigger as well. And you want to limit that number. So if you have, a ton of LPs on your cap table, then you're doing a lot of work to make sure those investors are happy, and a lot of, a lot of communication and a lot of, connecting. It's a little bit easier if you have fewer folks on the cap table. So as funds get bigger and bigger, they tend to go from individual investors to kind of larger investors, like maybe, a hospital will invest as part of their venture strategy, or an insurance company. And so you're kind of turning out those individual investors for more institutional investors. Every fund, that exists, you have your investors in fund one. They want those folks to invest in fund two and fund three, because if you can say, hey, we retained 100% of our investors, then that's a nice, merit badge to say everyone's happy with the work we did. They all came back for more. But there is, the farther along you go with the fund, that means it's a fund that does well. It has good returns, and so there's going to be kind of a higher bar for entry. So the key is, and I've been lucky there, was to work with a fund early on that does well. But that's kind of the process of how that will go from as you do fund one, fund two, fund three.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching thus far. If you found this video interesting and helpful, please hit the like and subscribe button below. It not only helps the channel, but helps everyone that we interview. Thanks for being here. So from my understanding, from what we talked about so far, if you want to sort of work your way into the VC world, like someone like yourself has, do you basically need to have the initial capital to invest? How does that work if you decide that you want to get into investing?
Yeah, interesting question. Ultimately, yeah, it's a big component. I mean, you'd like to say it's an egalitarian world, but it's definitely a pay-to-play system, and you're either bringing value with cash, background knowledge, connections, or a combination of the three.
So someone watching this is really interested in healthcare investing, interested in the innovation side, the research, doing the research behind companies, and what to look for if they're going to be successful or not. How do they go about kind of honing their skills or learning or kind of adding that it factor to themselves if they don't have the capital to sort of get into the game?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a handful of interesting communities. A lot of them are online, a lot of them are conference-based, a lot of them are Slack channels or LinkedIn groups, where kind of like-minded individuals connect and say, how do I add value to this company? As an emergency physician, I can talk a lot about airway management or trauma. I'm very, very able to see an idea and say, this will fly, this won't fly. This could fly if it gets tweaked this way. And everyone has unique background skills. And so that's a way to address that. From the physician side, some of the interesting groups, there's a group called Innovator MD. They run conferences, they run pitch competitions. They'll have Tuesday night lecture of someone that talks about how they started working with a company in an advisory role. I mentioned earlier the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs is an interesting group. When I set up the Salt Lake chapter, we'd have pitch events. We'd have physicians that brought devices to market come and tell us about that. And talked about Dr. Rosenhan. He did that with the pen blade. Another doctor in the Salt Lake community, again, named Dr. Tim Wolf, invented the mucosal atomizing device, which is a great alternative to starting an IV in a little kid that's traumatized or someone that has really hard IV access. And, all of these have great stories. As a resident in kind of a rough area, he saw a lot of patients that took drugs through their nose, and he thought, that's so much easier than an IV. Why aren't we doing this, on the medical side? But going from that idea to building a company is an interesting journey. And so it's interesting to hear folks that do that. Some of the Slack channels that are interesting, health tech nerds, is a lot of folks from, interdisciplinary backgrounds that talk about, product management, upcoming events, ideas, a lot of deal flow, a lot of feedback. And so some of these online communities are interesting. I'm a big fan of conferences outside your regular specialty conference. You can go to your ACOG if you're a gynecologist, or ASAP if you're an emergency physician. But I really like Health and Vive because they focus on what's innovative, what's new, and it's also a great way to connect with physicians that are working in non-clinical spaces as well.
So I'm going to go back a little bit to the healthcare startup side of things. If someone here is watching and they are looking for a venture capital investment in their healthcare idea, what would you say are your top tips for them when approaching a venture capital firm?
Some of the best things to do are to be strategic about it. If you are in the healthcare space, you want to go to companies that are investing in healthcare. If you're a stage, Series A, then you want to go to companies that make Series A investments. And that, even though that sounds like very simplistic, a lot of folks just kind of scatter shot and they send their pitch deck to everybody. But if you look at like the company's websites, they may have very specific criteria. They may say, on your 12 slides, we want to see these particular things. And we'll get slides that, they're sending to everybody, which is great, which makes a lot of sense. But if you're really looking to connect with a group that's going to be good for you, you want to spend a little extra time, tweak your deck, maybe have a couple different versions. And so that's something that the company is interested in. That's part of their investment thesis, that the investment firm's interested in. It's part of their investment thesis. And make sure that you have a good connection. The last thing you want to do is, submit a deck to a company that doesn't make those investments. They're not going to have like the background or the connections or the feedback that'll help you scale.
And how do you feel about sort of the connections in terms of like, should people be trying to find an introduction through LinkedIn? I've had some people approach me and say, oh, I saw that you're friends with this person on LinkedIn. I'm interested in getting an investment. And I'll be honest, like, I'm only really able to make that connection for that person like 20 to 30% of the time, because it's really based off of how well I know the founder and how well I know the VC. And if there's a situation where I don't really know either one of them too well, I'm not really comfortable making that introduction. So how do you feel about those kind of intros that come in through like LinkedIn, or like email?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. I mean, I get pitches all the time like, hey, we're doing this in real estate. I'm like, not where my network or interest or knowledge is. So it's not really helpful. Investors, they're just kind of like, one of the mantras is you want an A team with a B idea rather than a B team with an A idea, because you want someone that's built something, someone that's got background, or someone that you feel like can do it. And so, as you mentioned, it's a lot easier to make a warm intro if you have a lot of, respect for that person, if you know them well and you know that connection well. If you don't, it's pretty scattershot. If someone kind of approaches me and say, hey, that I don't really well, can you introduce you to this other person that I don't know really well either? And that's going to get to tell you about the value of that intro, like if I feel comfortable making it. But I think you do have to network the heck out of things. And I think that's why these community groups are useful, because maybe I don't know this person really well, but they post interesting things, or I see that they have active deal flow, or I meet them, through Health Tech Nerds, and then we connect at a conference, and it's someone that I like, and I'm close to that way. It's a lot easier to work through those connections that you have.
Awesome. Thank you, John. This was super interesting, very helpful. And what's the best way for people to find your venture capital firm?
Yeah, we are mmv.vc, and we're connected with me via LinkedIn.
Okay, awesome. And you're Dr. John Dayton on LinkedIn?
Yep. Yeah, John R. Dayton.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.